I never thought my life would pivot because of a box of sidewalk chalk. It was a Tuesday. Nothing fancy, nothing tragic, just one of those middle-of-the-week days where time feels like it's sitting on its hands. I was picking up a few things from the garage when I found it. An old plastic container with faded pastel sticks inside stopped me cold. The kind of stop where your hand freezes mad and your lungs forget what to do. That box hadn't been touched in over a decade. I used to draw chalk racetracks in the driveway for my daughters when they were little. Nora would pretend she was racing a jet-powered scooter, and Lily would insist she was driving a magical ice cream truck that sang Britney Spears songs. I'd sit on the concrete, legs going numb, drawing little signs that said, "No boys allowed in Daddy's own." I didn't care how ridiculous I looked. They laughed like their joy could split the sky, and that was enough. And now, that joy doesn't even return my texts. Let me back up. My name's Calvin. I'm 47. I repair elevators for a living in upstate New York, and I used to think I had a pretty average life. I've got a bald patch I try to ignore and knees that creak when I stand too fast. My ex-wife Ariel, had this way of making me feel like a guest in my own marriage for the last 6 years. But I stuck around because of the girls. Always because of the girls. Even when Ariel stopped laughing at my jokes. Even when she'd whisper on the phone in the laundry room. Even when she told me I parented too emotionally. I figured it was just stress. Marriages cool down, right? That's what people always say. It's just a phase. Ride it out. So I did. I rode that thing like it was strapped to rails. And the whole time, I clung to my role as dad. Like it was a title I earned in blood. Turns out I never earned it. Last fall, Nora and Lily came home for Ariel's birthday. I spent the entire week deep cleaning the house, buying their favorite cereal, even fixing the loose railing on the porch that had been wobbling since 2019. I thought it'd be like old times. Board games, wine, maybe some emotional reconnection. I got something else instead. After dinner, Ariel suddenly stood up and said, "I need to show you something, Calvin. Girls, you should probably stay too." Her voice had that lawyer-calm tone she used when she wanted to diffuse tension before it started. She sat back down, placed a small manila envelope on the table, and slid it toward me like it held receipts from hell. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said. Inside were 2 paternity test results. My name, 2 columns, 2 not the biological father stamps. Red ink. Cold. Final. I looked at the girls, my girls, and they didn't look shocked. They looked prepared. "We didn't know until this year," Nora said. "Mom told us everything. It doesn't change what you did for us, but we just need space to process it all." Lily wouldn't even meet my eyes. She just picked at the tablecloth like it was going to answer for her. Ariel leaned in and added, "It doesn't mean you weren't their father in your heart. But facts are facts. They deserve to know the truth. The truth." Funny how a word can go from sacred to weapon in under 10 seconds. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I just sat there like my bones had turned to powder. All those birthdays, all those late-night hospital visits, all those "I love you" dad cards with crayon hearts. None of it mattered now. I left the table, walked into the garage, and sat with that chalk box for 3 hours. That night, I made my choice. I would stop playing the role they said I never belonged to. No more holiday visits, no more college payments, no more pretending. But what none of them realized, what absolutely none of them expected, was that walking away wasn't the end. It was the trigger. And secrets have a way of echoing louder when the one man who kept them buried finally lets go. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling fan, watching its blade spin like time was being shredded above me. I kept hearing Nora say, "We just need space," and the cold clarity in Lily's silence. I'd given them my whole life, and now they were carving me out of theirs like I was a tumor they'd finally identified. I stayed in the guest room for a few days. I told Ariel I'd be moving out, and she didn't protest. Not even a tear. She just nodded and said, "Let me know if you need help with the boxes." The boxes? The same cardboard containers we once used to pack up Nora's stuffed animals when she turned 10 and decided she was too old for toys. The same ones I used to haul Lily's artwork home from her 3rd grade art fair. The one where she drew our family as stick figures with giant smiling faces and labeled me Super Dad. Now those boxes were swallowing up my presence in the home like I was an unwanted guest. And no one stopped me. I rented a small apartment in the next town over. 2 rooms, dim lighting, and a fridge that hummed like it had asthma. But it was mine. Empty as it was, at least it didn't lie to me. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from the girls. No birthday call from Lily. No Christmas message from Nora. Nothing. I started noticing things I'd never allowed myself to see before, like how quiet Ariel's phone used to go when I walked into a room, or how Girls' Weekend always aligned perfectly with her old boss's out-of-town business trips, or how once, when I was away on a work conference, Lily accidentally called me Mark on the phone and quickly said it was a joke. Mark, Ariel's ex-boyfriend from college. The guy she said was too immature to handle a serious relationship. Something about that name started itching at the back of my brain. So I did what every betrayed man eventually does. I pulled the thread. I went through old storage bins, pulled out Ariel's college photos and found one with Mark. Same dimples as Lily. Same smirk. I opened my laptop and started digging. A few social media searches, an old alumni newsletter, and a property record later, I found out Mark still lived 20 minutes from the house I just left. Married, no kids, but his wife owned a real estate agency that had once listed a cabin in the mountains, the same one Ariel claimed to visit for solitude every summer. It was too many coincidences. So, I reached out to someone I never thought I'd speak to again. Charlie Bergman. He's an old friend from my electrical trade days. We'd had a falling out years ago over something stupid, something about a borrowed tool and unpaid beers, but I knew he did part-time work as a private investigator after his divorce. I told him everything, gave him names, dates, and photos. He didn't judge. He just said, "If you're sure you want the answers, I'll find them." I was sure. What came back made my stomach turn. Dozens of photos, hotel logs, cabin rentals, voicemails. Ariel and Mark had never stopped seeing each other. Not once. They kept up a decades-long emotional, and at times physical, affair. Even during both pregnancies, especially during them. Charlie even found an email from Ariel to Mark dated around the time she was pregnant with Nora. It read, "Calvin's too soft-hearted to ask questions. He'll be a better father than you ever could." So that was my role. The backup plan. The better man. The placeholder. When I sat in my apartment and read through all of this, something shifted. I had been lied to not just by a wife but by time itself. Years stolen, memories corrupted, trust eroded. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. And yet, I still didn't lash out. I didn't burn their photos. I didn't go screaming to Nora and Lily. I didn't show up at Mark's door with fists or fury. Instead, I made a decision, one as silent and steady as snowfall. I would give them exactly what they asked for. Space. But not just physical space. Emotional, financial, legal. They didn't want me to be their father anymore? Then I wouldn't be. Not on birthdays, not in family documents, not in the will I hadn't updated in 10 years. But the thing about erasing someone like me is you better be sure I leave nothing behind. Because what I knew and what they didn't was that secrets have a way of fermenting. And this batch? It was just starting to bubble. I thought detachment would bring peace. I thought if I stopped checking my phone, stopped reading old texts, stopped replaying bedtime stories in my head, I'd finally get a handle on it. That maybe, just maybe, if I gave them the silence they clearly craved, the ache would dull. Didn't. Instead, the silence started to turn on me. The quiet in my apartment wasn't peaceful. It was a courtroom. Every creak in the floorboards became a verdict. Every flicker of the old ceiling light felt like an interrogation. I was living alone but not without voices. You see, it's not just the betrayal of the lie. It's the betrayal of identity. Who are you when the people you built your soul around decide you never belonged in the first place? I started journaling, something I hadn't done since high school. Most of it read like nonsense, just mental vomit trying to plug holes in a sinking emotional ship. But one night, I wrote a line I circled 3 times. If I wasn't their father, what was I? I couldn't answer it. Not yet. 2 weeks after Charlie dropped the final report on Ariel's affair, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten envelope, thick paper, my name in soft cursive, Calvin J. Mercer, which immediately struck me as odd. No one used my full name except lawyers and banks. It was from Nora. I stood there in the kitchen for 20 minutes just staring at it, not opening it. The fact that it was a letter and not a text already meant she was either trying to be sincere or trying to make it sting more. When I finally opened it, I braced myself for rejection. What I got was worse. It was 3 pages of polite cruelty. No profanity, no attacks, just a calm, patronizing dismantling of my fatherhood. She wrote about how she appreciated everything I provided, how I was stable during chaotic years, and how she didn't blame me for being hurt. Then she said something that cracked something ancient inside me. But I think it's time you focus on your own healing and stop expecting us to play pretend just to make you feel better. Play pretend. 20 years, soccer games, fever checks, prom-night pep talks, college tuition, first cars. Every scraped knee and broken curfew and night I sat awake wondering if they were safe. Pretend? Ariel had turned them into strangers. Polite strangers trained in emotional efficiency. I couldn't even recognize my daughters in their own words. That was when I made the second decision. I was done waiting to be acknowledged. I was going to rewrite everything. And that started with the will. Now, for context, I'm not rich. I'm not sitting on some massive pile of gold. But my dad left me a decent inheritance when he passed, enough to buy property and set up some long-term investments. Over the years, I quietly built that up. A small lake house in the Catskills, a cabin rental that brings in passive income, a portfolio that isn't flashy, but it's solid. And all of it had been earmarked for Nora and Lily since they were in grade school. I scheduled a meeting with a new estate attorney, someone Ariel didn't know, someone fresh. I brought all the documents, all the account numbers, and said one sentence. I want every mention of those girls removed. The lawyer blinked. Are you sure? That's significant. I'm sure, I said. They're not my daughters. Not legally, not genetically, not emotionally. They made that clear. We spent the next few hours drawing up a new plan. I left my entire estate to my late sister's son, Theo, a quiet, autistic kid who always sent me birthday cards and still called me Uncle Cal, even though he'd only met me 6 times. He was 17 now. No father figure, no support system. I figured if I was going to vanish from one family, I might as well appear for someone who wouldn't treat my presence like an inconvenience. But I wasn't done. After I left the lawyer's office, I drove straight to my storage unit. It was packed with 20 years' worth of memories. Crayon drawings, school projects, VHS tapes, photo albums, even old voicemails burned onto CDs. I opened every bin, every envelope, and one by one, I labeled each one, "Do not return to sender." I didn't throw them away. I donated them. Every item with their handwriting, their photos, their childhood quirks. I boxed up and dropped off at a community theater that used vintage family props for stage design. Let them become fiction. Let someone else play the role of the dad they never wanted. And still, they had no idea I was doing any of this. They thought I'd slink off, that I'd wallow, that I'd leave the puzzle half-built and sit crying at the table. But I was finally doing what I should have done years ago, reclaiming the pieces. And as I stood outside that storage unit, empty now and echoing with the ghosts of a fake family, I realized something chilling. They hadn't just lied to me, they'd rehearsed the lie. And whatever they rehearsed next, I was going to be ready for it. You'd think after purging my life of them, wiping them from the will, cutting off communication, packing away every physical memory, that I'd feel lighter, cleaner, some kind of peace, maybe. But the truth is, emotional scar tissue doesn't form that fast. I wasn't angry anymore. That would have been easier. No, what I felt was colder, like watching frost form on the inside of a window. Distant, disconnected, still there but unreachable. They weren't just gone from my life. They were ghosts who hadn't even died. And then, out of nowhere, they showed up. Literally. It was late afternoon. I was home early from work because one of my elevator jobs got postponed due to some permit delay. I had just set a kettle on when I heard the knock. Not a doorbell, a knock. The kind you hear when someone doesn't want attention. I opened it. Nora was standing there alone. No warning, no text, just there. Her expression was a blend of guilt and forced bravery, like a student coming in late for a test and hoping the teacher wouldn't ask questions. "Hey," she said, eyes flicking down to the floor, then back up at me. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let her in, mostly out of instinct or maybe curiosity. I wasn't sure yet. She sat down on the couch, the same spot where she used to curl up with popcorn and watch Jurassic Park for the 100th time as a kid. Now she perched there like she wasn't sure the cushions would hold her. "I shouldn't have written that letter," she said finally. "I didn't know how much it would hurt you." I raised an eyebrow. "But you knew it would hurt." She blinked. "I guess I thought you'd understand." I sat down across from her, not beside her. I needed the distance, not just for my sanity, but to keep the illusion of control. I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret. "Did your mother send you?" I asked. "No," she said. "She doesn't know I'm here." That surprised me, but not enough to soften. "So, what do you want?" She hesitated, then took a slow breath. "I don't know. Closure? Connection? I didn't think losing you would feel like this." That sentence hit me in the ribs. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "You didn't lose me, Nora. You erased me. You cut me out surgically, like I was a bad decision you made in your youth." She winced. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I leaned forward. "You and your sister made it clear. You thanked me for my support, like I was a school counselor. You told me to stop playing pretend. You used the words space to process like we were strangers in a breakup text. You knew what that letter would do." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was confused, Dad, Calvin. I didn't know how to feel. One minute I thought I was your daughter, the next I'm told I'm someone else's. It messed with my head. It still does." "And whose fault is that?" She didn't answer. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and gave myself a few seconds to breathe. I didn't want to break. Not in front of her. Not now. When I returned, she was staring at a photo on the wall, one of the only ones I'd kept. A picture of my dad holding me when I was 6. She looked at it like it was a museum piece, something historic but irrelevant. "You still think about us?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I think about who you were, not who you became." Then I walked to my desk and picked up the folder, the one with copies of everything. The will revision, the asset transfers, even the paternity results. I handed it to her. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said, "but I want you to see what choices lead to." She opened it slowly. I watched her read, watched her lips part as she realized what she was holding. When she got to the final page, her eyes darted back to mine, wide. "You cut us out completely." I nodded. "But Theo? Mom barely even let us talk to Aunt Marcy's family." "I did," I said, "because Theo never pretended to love me. He never performed affection. He never withdrew it when it became inconvenient. He's consistent, loyal, and he'll need support after his mom's gone. That's what real family looks like." She looked like she wanted to say something, but all she managed was, "You don't forgive us?" "No," I said, steady and calm. "I just don't need you anymore." She left without another word. I closed the door behind her and stood there, hands still on the doorknob, breathing slow. Part of me ached. Of course it did. Love doesn't get deleted. It rots. And when it rots, it leaves something behind, like mildew in the corners of a house no one lives in anymore. But I knew something with certainty now. They thought I'd always be available. They thought forgiveness was a credit card they could swipe when things got uncomfortable. But not this time, and not for free. After Nora left, I thought that would be the end of it. One uncomfortable visit, a messy goodbye, and then silence again. Cleaner, colder. But 2 nights later, I found myself pacing around the living room, unable to sit still. Not because of what she said, but because of something she didn't say. There was a tremble in her voice when she mentioned Ariel, a hesitation like she was holding back more than guilt. I told myself I didn't care. I repeated it out loud. "I don't care. I'm not their father." I'm done. But people like me, men who give, men who build, don't get to stop caring just because it hurts. The wiring runs too deep. So I called Charlie again. I told him I had one more job. I wanted everything on Mark, the biological father of my daughters. I wanted to know what Ariel had hidden behind the curtain all these years. If I was finally going to bury this part of my life, I needed to know exactly what kind of ghost had been sitting at my family's table all along. Charlie didn't ask questions. He said he'd call in a few days. In the meantime, I stayed away from my usual routines. I didn't go to the diner where the waitress always called me honey. I didn't show up at the VFW on poker night. I didn't even pick up my phone when Lily texted for the first time in over a year. Are you really cutting us off like that? After everything. No greeting, no apology, just the assumption that I owed them a seat at a table they'd already pushed me away from. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out a box I hadn't touched since moving into the apartment. Inside were photos of my mother, Margaret Mercer. She passed when I was 19. Stubborn, God-fearing, and so full of certainty it scared most people. But she loved hard. She used to say, "Son, if the people you break your back for can sleep peacefully while you lie awake, they were never your people." I stared at her portrait for a long time. Then I booked a trip. Not a vacation, a mission. I drove 5 hours north to the Catskills cabin I owned but hadn't visited in nearly 2 years. I bought it during a high point in my marriage when I still thought we were in love. We only used it 3 times. Ariel always said it was too quiet. I think now she just didn't want to spend time with me when there wasn't cell service. The cabin still smelled like old pine and dry winter air. I brought firewood, a notebook, and 1 bottle of whiskey I wasn't planning on drinking but needed to see. It reminded me I could say no. That first night, the silence felt different. It wasn't courtroom silence anymore. It was cleansing, like the house knew I had finally stopped lying to myself. And then Charlie called. His voice was low, controlled, professional, but I could tell something was off. "You're going to want to sit down," he said. "I already am," I replied. "Mark Devlin isn't who you think he is. Not even close." He paused, then continued. 3 years ago, he filed for bankruptcy. Medical debt. A rare genetic heart condition. HCM. Same one that took his brother. He's not just broke. He's sick. Real sick. That caught me off guard. "So?" I asked, unsure why this mattered. Charlie hesitated. "It's inherited. Runs in families. Passes to kids 50% of the time. Fatal if untreated. Sometimes no symptoms for years." It hit me like a punch. "Wait, Nora and Lily have no idea," he said. "And neither does Ariel." I gripped the phone tighter. "You're telling me my daughters, no, those girls, have been walking around with a genetic time bomb and no one thought to check because the truth was too inconvenient?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." I sat in stunned silence. I couldn't breathe for a second. My anger had always been about betrayal, about loyalty, about love given and unreturned. But this was something else entirely. This was life or death. And the person they trusted, the man Ariel protected, the real father, had vanished when it counted most. Charlie finished with one more blow. "Mark's been in contact with Ariel again. Not romantically, legally. He's been asking about custody rights now that you're out of the picture. And get this, he wants his name on Lily's birth certificate. Retroactively." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because of the nerve. The man disappears for 2 decades, pops back up with a failing heart, and decides he's ready to be dad of the year. "You think he wants to reconnect?" I asked. "No," Charlie said. "I think he wants a donor match." I hung up the phone and stared out the cabin window for a long time. That was the moment it all snapped into place. They didn't just cut me out of their lives. They were preparing to use someone else. And he might have been the biological father, but he wasn't built for the fallout. I, on the other hand, was, and now I had a choice to make. Walk away for good or let them see what consequences really look like when you bet everything on biology and forget who actually raised the fire. I didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I shut off my phone. I stopped checking the clock. There was a kind of power in that, reclaiming my time, my air, my silence. For once, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. But the more time I spent away from them, the more I started to see everything clearly. You can't do that when you're still surrounded by the wreckage, when the people who wrecked you keep stopping by to ask how you're holding up. I thought about that night when Lily fell off the backyard swing. She was 7, maybe 8, blood on her forehead, screaming like the world was ending. I carried her into the house, shirt soaked in her blood and tears. Ariel? Nowhere. She was running errands, a phrase I now recognize as code for something else. I was the one who held her together every time. And now they wanted to put someone else's name on her birth certificate. Someone who never held her through night terrors. Someone who never sat in that freezing gymnasium while she lost her 3rd grade spelling bee and cried in the car for an hour. Someone who didn't know that she always pretended to be asleep after midnight because she thought dreams only happened when you were truly still. Mark Devlin was nothing but DNA and a missed heartbeat. He didn't deserve them. And maybe they didn't deserve me either. That was a hard thing to admit. But the truth was finally carving out space inside me. I started writing a letter. Not to Ariel, not to Nora, not even to Lily. To myself. It began like this. You were never pretending. You were never a placeholder. You were the only one who showed up. And if they couldn't see that, it's because they were taught not to. I kept writing for hours, page after page. A full confession of everything I never said aloud. All the times I swallowed pain for the sake of peace. All the moments I knew something was wrong. But I was too afraid to say it out loud because I didn't want to face a world where my family didn't love me back. By the time I finished, my hand was shaking. Not from anger, from release. That letter never got mailed. It didn't need to be. It had done its job. But as I packed up to leave the cabin and return to whatever life waited for me back in town, I made a second decision, one that surprised even me. I was going to meet Mark Devlin. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to know what kind of man Ariel had chosen to cheat with, to lie for, to build this entire quiet empire of secrets around. And more than anything, I wanted to see if he'd even try to take accountability or if, like the rest of them, he was just another actor reading from a script he didn't write. I found his address easily. Charlie had already included it in the file. He lived in a dull brick townhome on the edge of East Albany, tucked behind a dental office and a vape shop. I parked across the street, watched for a while. The house was still, curtains drawn, no lights on. Felt like he was already halfway gone. When I knocked, there was a long pause before the door opened. He looked smaller than I expected, thinner, pale. His face had the kind of hollowness you don't get from skipping meals. You get it from being eaten from the inside out. Still, his eyes were sharp, alert. "Can I help you?" he asked. "You're Mark," I said. "I'm Calvin." His expression changed instantly. Not shock, recognition. "I figured this day might come," he said quietly, stepping aside. "You want to come in?" I did. His place was clean, uncomfortably so. No clutter, no warmth, just beige furniture and ticking clocks. The kind of home that looked more like a hospital waiting room than a life. We sat. "I know about the tests," I said. "I know about the condition. I know about the custody push." He didn't deny any of it. Instead, he looked straight at me and said, "I didn't ask for this, you know? I didn't even know they were mine until last year." "Because Ariel told you?" I asked. He nodded. Said she wanted to come clean before it was too late. Her words, not mine. "But let's not pretend she did it for you." I clenched my jaw. "You never showed up. You never asked. You never wondered." "I wondered," he said. "But she told me they weren't mine. That you were the dad. That I needed to respect that. And yet here you are," I said, "trying to get on a birth certificate and maybe a transplant list. All in the same breath." He flinched. That one landed. "I didn't come to beg," he said. "I came to see who you are. The man they threw away." Silence. And then something cracked. Not in him. In me. Because I realized something I hadn't before. They didn't just reject me. They aligned themselves with a man who didn't even want the job in the first place. A man who was more afraid of Ariel than he was committed to his children. And that meant one thing. They chose him. Not because he was better, but because it was easier to chase the fantasy of a real father than to face the reality of who actually showed up. I stood to leave. "I won't stop you from chasing whatever role you think you deserve," I said. "But you and I both know you weren't built for it. And if they come looking for bone marrow or kidneys or comfort, good luck." He didn't follow me out. He didn't even speak. I walked away without looking back. But I knew in my gut the next time someone knocked on my door, it wouldn't be for forgiveness. It would be for help. And this time, they'd find out what it feels like to be told, "You're not mine, either." It was nearly 6 weeks after my visit with Mark before the next chapter of this slow disaster wrote itself across my doorstep. 6 weeks of silence, 6 weeks of waking up in a bed that no one else had ever shared with me, 6 weeks of no apologies, no explanations, and no change. In that time, I reconnected with Theo. I'd driven out to see him and his foster family, distant cousins who were doing their best but were clearly overwhelmed. Theo was 17, still painfully shy, and barely spoke above a whisper. But when I showed up with a box of books on programming and one of those overpriced mechanical keyboards, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. No judgment, no performance, no guilt, just quiet gratitude. I didn't tell him everything, just that I wanted to help, that I wanted to be around, that he mattered. And when I left that afternoon, he walked me to the car and asked one question. "Are you sure?" I nodded. I've never been more sure. That moment gave me more healing than any therapist or bottle of whiskey ever could. But back in my own apartment, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was still building, like a low rumble beneath the surface, something waiting to erupt. And one rainy Sunday evening, it did. A knock at the door, but this time it wasn't one of the girls. It was Ariel. I didn't open it right away. I just stood behind the door, staring through the peephole at a woman I no longer recognized. She was wearing one of those long gray coats she always used to reserve for dinner parties. Clean lines, expensive, no warmth. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her posture was tense but not panicked, almost like she was prepared, like she'd rehearsed this moment in her head. When I finally opened it, I didn't say a word, just leaned on the door frame and waited. "I didn't come to fight," she said quickly. "That's good," I replied, "because I stopped fighting for you a long time ago." She sighed. "Can I come in?" I let her. Not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted to see if she had the spine to sit across from me and face what she broke. She sat at the edge of the couch, hands clasped together like she was waiting to be sentenced. "Mark's in the hospital," she said. There it was. The pitch, the hook, the true reason she came. Congestive heart failure. They don't think he'll make it to summer without a transplant. I nodded slowly, arms crossed. "And this involves me because?" She bit her lip. "Because Lily was tested last week. She's not a match. And Nora," she refused, "said if Mark didn't raise her, she's not giving him anything. She's angry at me, at everything." I almost laughed. The irony of it. The child who pushed me away now claiming some moral high ground because the man she replaced me with turned out to be a broken blueprint. "She's angry," I repeated. "Imagine that." Ariel didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, an old one. Me, Nora, and Lily at the beach. I remembered that day. Lily had eaten so much watermelon she threw up on the sand. I carried her all the way back to the car, soaking wet and sunburned, while Ariel stayed behind to clean up. She never liked messes, not the real kind. "You were a good father," she whispered. I took the photo, stared at it for a second, then set it on the table. "No," I said calmly. "I am a good man, and I did everything a father should do. But the difference is I didn't do it for credit. I did it because I loved them, even when it hurt." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not anymore." "I know you hate me," she said. "I don't," I replied. "That would mean I still gave you space to affect me." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she said the one thing I never expected her to say. "I'm scared, Calvin." What if this is all my fault? What if I ruined their lives by keeping the truth hidden for so long? I stared at her, not out of rage, but out of astonishment. Only now, when the man she gambled everything on was fading from view, did she suddenly discover doubt? You didn't ruin their lives, I said coldly. You stole mine, and theirs are still deciding whether to crash or grow. That's on them now. She stood to leave, but before she reached the door, she turned back and asked, "If they come to you, if they really need you, will you help them?" It was a cruel question, a trap dressed as compassion. I didn't answer right away. I walked past her, opened the door, and held it without a word. She stood there, caught in a moment of indecision, and then finally walked out. I closed the door behind her, and then I sat on the floor in the quiet, holding that photo. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there staring at a life that no longer existed. A life built on love, betrayed by blood, and now ghosted by everyone it once held together. If they came back, I still didn't know what I would do. But I knew one thing with certainty. The next time that knock came, it wouldn't find the man who used to live here. It would find the man who replaced him. It was almost spring when the final knock came. Not dramatic, not desperate, just quiet, measured. The kind of knock that doesn't beg for attention. It waits for permission. When I opened the door, Lily stood there. No umbrella, hair damp from the drizzle, hands in the pockets of a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. She looked older than I remembered, not in age, but in weight, like life had finally pressed itself onto her shoulders. "I don't know where to start," she said. I stepped aside and gestured toward the couch. She walked in slowly, the same way she used to when she came home late from a high school party she thought I didn't know about. There was hesitation in every step. Fear, but not of punishment, of rejection. She sat down and stared at her hands for a long time before speaking. "I was awful to you. I know that. I told myself I was just confused, that I needed to figure out who I was without you. But I wasn't confused. I was angry, and I didn't know what to do with it. I stayed silent, let her speak. Mark passed away last week," she said quietly. "He was on the transplant list. Never got the call." I nodded slowly. "He wrote me a letter before he died. Told me he wished he'd been braver, that he'd never stopped thinking about me, but that he wasn't proud of who he was." She finally looked at me. "He said you were the one who deserved the title, that it was always you." I didn't speak right away. I wasn't ready. Some wounds don't close with words. They close with time. But her eyes were different now. Open. Not asking for a second chance, but simply acknowledging the first one she'd thrown away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photo. The same one Ariel had left behind weeks earlier. The beach, the watermelon, my sunburned shoulders, her smile. "I don't know what we are now," she said, "but if there's even a fraction of space left for me in your life, I want to earn it." There was a long pause, and then I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured 2 mugs of coffee. No ceremony, no speeches, just 2 people sitting across from each other, nursing the distance between them with every shared breath. We talked for hours. She told me about the things I'd missed, college, friendships, fears. She asked questions she never asked when she was younger, real questions, the kind that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the familiar flicker of something I thought was gone. Love. Not the blind, boundless kind. Not the one that gives without question or boundary. But the kind that knows better now. The kind that has seen the worst and still believes in the chance for something good. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't need to. By the time the sky turned orange and the rain had stopped, Lily stood up, hugged me, really hugged me, and whispered, "Thank you for being stronger than I deserved." After she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the clouds break apart, letting the sun do its slow return. I didn't know if Nora would come. I didn't know if Ariel would ever face the truth in full. But I knew who I was, and that was enough. Because being a father isn't just about DNA. It's about who shows up. And even when the world tried to erase me from that title, I stayed. Not for recognition, not for reward, but because that's what real men do. They stay, they heal,